Hello and welcome to our new energy peer learning forum. My name is Derek Bowen, and we have Michael Grasso from Sonova and Jorg Heinemann from Intervenue with us today as well. I'm going to kick off with just some quick slides, and then we'll jump into the panel pretty quick here. All right, also first things, we did create a little worksheet. So I'm just posting the link onto Zoom, and it's also available on LinkedIn. And the idea here is, try something new, make a little worksheet so you can take notes in it and help. Really want this to be a conversation. And as we're talking, you can jot ideas down, and we're offering with this free 1-hour consultation with our new energy team to talk through the market forces impacting your company and what we're seeing from others in the industry. So hopefully that's helpful to you. Setting the stage just a little bit about what we want to talk about today, the market forces that are leading to the acceleration of the energy transition. The way we're seeing this, and I really like this view about, since 1950 to 2050, how are the primary energy consumptions happening? So we took the past data from the Energy Information Administration, and you can see the same curves in traditional energy sources, petroleum, natural gas, that we're seeing starting today in new energy. And then also like that, rather than trying to predict just one line, we see the range of possibilities, right? This future that's in front of us could be new energy continues at about the same pace, and there's getting pretty broad consensus within the industry that we're at a turning point where new energy is really going to accelerate and take off. And so what we're interested today is thinking about and talking about what are those drivers that could impact that pace to either shoot up and really take off, or that could slow things down. And as business leaders, what should we be paying attention to so that we can take advantage of opportunities and avoid the risks that maybe come with that? So if we're thinking about slower pace, faster pace, and those drivers and those impacts, we've honed in on these 5 areas to consider that where a lot of these fall into when we've had conversations with people. So public policy, economics, finance, technology, environmental, and consumer demand. And have this at a high level. Here you can look at it. I'm hoping to, with our panelists and if we have conversations with you after this, dive into the kind of like next level deeper. But you can see, like in public policy, obviously, if there's market protections or incentive programs removed, that could slow down the pace of the current energy transition. However, what we're seeing with the new administration coming in, they're talking about increasing the incentives, or what sort of incentives would be helpful, such as carbon pricing, or thinking about energy security from OPEC. Those things could all lead us to a faster energy transition than maybe we've seen in the past. And similar in finance, similar in technology, similar in the way that customers demand, right? How they get their energy and how things are moving in the industry. So we found this to be a good framework for really widening our view and considering all those things. And even though maybe ideologically and looking at the environmental science, we see that a faster pace would be better for those things to avoid climate change disruption. Just because we all know that's what that would help there, doesn't mean that the world's necessarily going to go that way. And we as business leaders should be paying attention to both what we can impact and then what we can do about it based on what's happening out there. So with that, we'll jump into the conversation first with Michael and then with Jorg. So I'll spend a couple minutes with Michael, then we'll spend a couple minutes with Jorg, and then we're going to open it for Q&A at the end. And so feel free to put your questions into the Zoom chat or in LinkedIn chat, wherever you have joined us from. All right. So Michael, just please introduce yourself and tell us what Sunnova's been up to recently.
Hey, thanks, Derek. Appreciate that. So Michael Grasso, Chief Marketing and Growth Officer for Sunnova Energy. So Sunnova is a residentially focused energy services company. We provide service across 25 US states and territories, have a customer base of just over 116,000, and really focused on the intersection of new energy on a decentralized basis for consumers and how they can better electrify their homes to get both an economic savings as well as a better resiliency benefit. So we've been in business for about 8 years now, growing extremely quickly, the fastest growing energy services company in the US. And we're bringing to consumers the best solution that they can get. We're bringing them rooftop solar for their homes, combined with battery storage so that they can control how they generate energy, how they consume energy, and they can weather all these crazy weather activities that are going on around us, and all the grid outages and other activities that are going on. And we do that with a services wrapper that allows that consumer to not have to worry about anything. We monitor and maintain the system. We ensure that it performs to the level that the consumer is expecting. The Sunnova service technicians take care of the equipment for that consumer for 25 years. We make sure the battery is going to perform the way it's expected. And we provide these customers of ours, the best experience that you can possibly get. So we're all about delivering energy independence. Our mission is to power energy independence, and we see that as our calling to make sure that consumers have an option to get a better energy service that they can't get from their local utility, to get it on a decentralized basis in a way that is served to them the way that they need it to be, to ensure that they're going to have energy when they need it, how they need it, and not have to worry about the economics that go with it, because it's going to be better priced than anywhere else they can get it.
Yeah, I've heard your company describe itself as a wireless power company, which is an interesting phrase, I think. So tell us, as a residential focused company, what other market trends you're paying attention to?
Yeah, so we're obviously interested in ensuring that we're keeping up with the consumer's demand. So I think the first trend that's really important is that we're seeing a better performing solar market this year than I think we've seen in at any point probably in the past. The solar industry overall is doing extremely well, and Sunnova continues to grow our share in the market, in addition to taking our own share. So I think that the trend right now is in the growth in solar. More consumers want it. They want it because of the benefits that come with it, the economics and the resiliency. We're also seeing extremely high attachment rates for the storage offering. Consumers are looking for that resiliency. I think we're all tired of being without power. We're tired of the threat of the brownout or the blackout, whether you're in Texas and taking on the full frontal from the freeze that happened a few months ago, or you're in a coastal community and getting ready for another record hurricane season that's expected to do a lot of damage across the country, or maybe just these crazy rains we're seeing in different parts of the country, or a power shutoff in California. Consumers are looking for more storage options and for bigger storage options. I think that part of the sub-trend in storage is you don't want just a couple circuits of your home backed up. You want your whole home backed up. You want the ability to operate off-grid the same way you'd operate on-grid. And that's, Derek, what we're really thinking about when we talk about wireless power. You don't have to have that dependency upon the grid. You can operate your home as a nanogrid. We call it the Sunnova Adaptive Home, but it adapts to all your needs. It adapts to the circumstances around you. It adapts to weather events, and it's smart enough to predict and then to react. And so I think the trend of growing solar interest, growing storage interest, and then better home electrification and utilization of that resource is really where we see things going.
Yeah, and that's really possible as solar and storage costs have come down. And that's changing the way customers are thinking about self-generation, right? What do you see? Have you seen any other ways that customer attitudes about solar have shifted?
I think that, depending on where you fall on whether or not we have aggressive climate change or mild climate change, I think we all get the fact that we need to do something about the current state of the union, right? The idea that we can continue to burn fossil fuels is just not a sustainable approach. Again, regardless of where you fall out on the weather issues, I happen to believe that there's something we can do about this. I think that there's realization across the US and globally that we need to react to the carbon trends that we've been seeing, and we need to do more with renewable energy and decarbonization. So I think that's also influencing consumers. I think they're waking up to that. And I think with the recent year and a half or so we've all spent under the auspices of COVID, and what it's done to people's work-life balance and where they spend the majority of their time, the home is definitely something that we want to protect, that everybody sees as sacred for their families, for their businesses, and for their own well-being. And I think that you've seen that in the real estate trends, but I think you're also seeing that in the energy trends now. And then I think the final thing I might throw out is just, we're preparing for EVs. Like, we're going to be an electric vehicle culture, and that's going to put more demand on the home's energy infrastructure and the grid's energy infrastructure. And your ability to generate the fuel your vehicle needs on your rooftop is a more efficient way of doing it than any other. And the ability to power that vehicle and continue to power your home is kind of where the next phase of this whole electrification is going to present itself.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, the EV angle. I've thought about it a couple different ways. One is, like you said, as a consumer, absolutely being able to generate the fuel for your car on your roof would be amazing. There's people on the kind of the new energy thinkers and future grid thinkers think about, oh, well, that's another battery that then I could connect anywhere and create this decentralized resource whenever I need it. But then, of course, the utility and the people who maintain the transformers and all that grid infrastructure are very concerned about the unpredictability that would add, doing something like that. So it's an interesting place where you get these mix of different interests and possibilities, and really a lot of different things that could happen.
Yeah, there's a confluence there, right? And I think what happens behind the meter happens behind the meter. So if a consumer is generating, using, storing, drawing from different devices within the home behind the meter, then that's at their discretion. And as long as they're not causing any impact to the grid, as long as they're not releasing that energy back to the grid without the support of the utility or under a structure that works for the utility, I think that's the way that they can operate. But more so, the utility and the grid need consumers to generate energy in their homes, and they need the resources that companies like Sunnova are providing through the relationships that we have with them, through our grid services, right, where we can utilize the stored energy in the home to either reduce demand on the grid or to release energy back to the grid when the utility can't service those loads. There's no way to scale the utility efficiently. The infrastructure in the US would require trillions of dollars in infrastructure, new generation, et cetera, to keep up with the current demands, and even just to maintain the existing state of the union. And as many states and other jurisdictional areas move away from natural gas, it's going to put more demand on the grid. So we're going to push more to electrification, and more consumers are getting EVs, and the infrastructure is not there. So companies like Sunnova and the services that we provide will benefit both the consumer that has our service. It'll benefit the utility who's trying to service other consumers who need more stability, and it'll help those consumers who don't have their own energy systems in their homes, because it provides more resiliency to the overall solution that the utilities are providing.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So you also brought up kind of metering and releasing it back to the grid, which makes me think of net metering and how that regulatory framework is what's really unlocks solar in the states where it is currently very active. And then, of course, there's several states where that's not happened so much. So in your mind, or in looking to the future, what would it take to really open up solar to be possible, across the entire US?
Well, solar is possible today. I mean, in the right circumstances, it works everywhere. The U.S. is benefiting from the fact that there isn't a state that doesn't have at least decent irradiance and can generate good energy from the rooftop. Net metering definitely has helped along the way to open up markets, but we operate in many markets today where there is no net metering. I think it's less about net metering, and it's more about ensuring that the right regulation and support for the services available, and that the more we can do to drive consistency and simplicity across all of the different utilities and how they operate with solar. That's probably more important than anything else. The industry has tried to attack this on the permitting side because permits have historically been challenging and still need to see those processes improved. But also, I think it's just a matter of making sure that consumers can get choice. They can have choice in what they put on their homes, that they are fairly compensated for the investments they're making and the benefit that that system is providing to the grid, and that overall we're able to serve consumers the way that they want to be served.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it resonates. I know a little bit about Sonova. I know you use a broker model and work closely with kind of frontline companies in each of those communities for a lot of those reasons, right? To make the permitting and those relationships with the utility a little bit more smoother.
That's definitely one of the benefits of Sonova. Like, we have over 500 dealers operating across our territories today, and those dealers are local to the community. They live in the community, they operate in the community. Sonova brings a national footprint. We bring the resources that are necessary to backstop that customer relationship with a 25-year warranty and ensure that everything operates the way it needs to, and we'll be here for the long term. But our local dealers are able to understand what's happening, really connect with the consumer on a local level, and ensure that that system is properly designed and built and operational before it's handed off to us, where we can take it on and make sure it operates for the rest of its existence.
Awesome. Thanks, Michael. All right, Jorg, can you share with us about yourself and your journey through Intervenue?
Sure, you bet, Derek. Great to be here. I'm Jorg Heinemann. I'm the CEO of Intervenue. We make an ultra durable, ultra flexible battery for virtually any stationary use case, using a unique technology called nickel hydrogen. I've spent the last 4 years in the battery sector. Prior to that, I was an executive with SunPower, where I led the grid scale business and the construction and operation of large scale power plants around the world. And then in what feels like a lifetime before that, I was a partner with Accenture for nearly 20 years. About a year ago this time, I was just about to exit the battery world, having concluded that lithium ion was going to take over the planet, and there was just no way to deal with and combat the learning curves that we're seeing in that technology. And I got a call from through a search firm from our founder, looking for a CEO of a new battery startup, and I almost didn't take the call after 3 years of banging my head against the wall. But I looked up who he was. He's a professor at Stanford, happens to be the premier material scientist on the planet. His name is Yi Shui. He leads the Precourt Energy Institute, and what I learned that he had done with his team was figure out how to take an ancient technology, nickel hydrogen batteries, that was conceived in the 80s, deployed in the 90s on satellites, the International Space Station, Hubble Space Telescope, et cetera, and go take and think about that use case for a minute. That's putting a battery into outer space. It's got to last essentially forever, 30,000 charge discharge cycles. That would be 3 a day for 30 years, essentially infinite. Be able to deal with super hot temperatures up to 60 degrees Celsius, super cold, -40, and then zero maintenance. And I mean zero. You can't touch the thing because it's a spacewalk to go fix a battery in a satellite, right? They had figured out a way to take that, which was ridiculously expensive, and go cost reduce it. Take out all the high cost materials, replace them with earth abundant, readily available materials, and go redesign the form factor for large scale manufacturing so that we can deploy that in stationary applications here. And that's what we're doing. And so we're taking a proven technology, we're cost reducing it. We know it works. A lot of battery companies spend a decade or more trying to figure out a chemistry or reach a breakthrough that they need to, basically to deliver the promise. We're taking something that we know works, and even with the new materials we're using, we're absolutely certain of that. And we're off to the races scaling that up. So it's a super fun play. It's a differentiated battery. It does things nobody else can, including lithium ion. And it offers the customer a low cost value proposition. Think an initial capital expenditure equivalent to lithium ion, but zero OpEx. So there's no maintenance on this thing. It's a pretty fun place to be.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you're more utility scale focused. So what are the market trends you're looking at as you go about with Intervenue?
Yeah, no, technically our battery will do anything stationary, so it could be all the way down to residential. We're focusing on the larger stuff initially because we need a minimum amount of scale in order to be viable, in order to reach that cost parity point. If I back up and think about your intro slide on the trend and the change in the power mix over the last several years, and then looking forward in the future, I believe we are at the very beginning of the single biggest economic transformation that we'll see in our lifetimes. Bigger than the internet, bigger than social media, bigger than anything that we can think back on. And what we've all grown up with and been accustomed to is a one-way electric power value chain, central station generation, push electrons over transmission distribution lines, and then consume at a point of variable load. And it's a remarkable value chain. It's the ultimate just in time. There's no inventory on that. It's kind of amazing that it works. It's crazy low cost. And it works around the world. We take it for granted, and it's pretty cool. Now we're introducing a huge amount of change at every section of that value chain. We're replacing big, standard, steady central station fossil fuel based generation with intermittent generation in the form of wind and solar, which are now by far the cheapest source of generation. We're seeing solar as low as 1 cent per kilowatt hour in parts of the world. At the high end is about 3 cents a kilowatt hour levelized. Wind's been below 2 cents for a long time. Nothing else touches that. That's less than the fuel cost to go feed a coal plant, and it's pretty close to the equivalent for a gas thermal plant. We're deregulating around the world the transmission line. So you've got congestion now there, which introduces problem. Think of it like a highway network with traffic problems. And then we're introducing all kinds of both distributed generation, as well as electrifying the world, electric vehicles, shifting everything from natural gas to whole home electric, et cetera. So that's fundamental change at every node in the value chain. And the legacy electric power network, folks are still looking at this for the most part in the same way they viewed it for 100 years, and for good reason, because we've figured out how to make this thing work by thinking in terms of blocks of power times time. Oh, I can forecast days, weeks, seasons ahead. I know I'm going to have to bring up a certain amount of megawatts of peak power in the afternoon as solar ramps down, et cetera, and then take that off. And that's driving the thinking about how much time, how much duration of energy storage would I need to operate in that, the grid as we know it. Oh, I know I'm going to need more distribution lines to bring solar from where it's available to where the point of load is, et cetera. And then meanwhile, you've got folks working the distributed side like Sonova, who are very quickly getting us to a point where customers like you and me will be able to generate solar on our rooftop, put it in a battery, a pretty long duration one, very affordably, and effectively defect from the grid. So this world's it's gonna turn upside down. Now, what I'm convinced of, and the reason we're doing what we're doing at Intervenue is, I'm not sure how that mix is going to change and how quickly and what it's going to look like, but I'm certain that the world will want batteries that are flexible. Flexible meaning they behave like our cell phones do, like electric vehicles do, like power tools do, and that they can be charged pretty quickly whenever there's excess power available on the grid, when there's solar, when there's a peak window, for example. Charge them fast and then dispatch them fast or slow based on the specific load at the time. And that's going to be really hard to predict, but that flexibility to charge fast or slow and then use it however I want to, that's pretty rare. Lithium ion does that really well. We do that really well. Pretty much no one else does. And the difference between us and the legacy lithium ion is what we all know. Lithium ion's got a challenge of basically cycle life, and then you got to baby the thing to keep it at they're in the right temperature zone. Where we offer a much simpler alternative. It also happens to be super sustainable. It's kind of easy to put together, easy to take apart. No toxic materials, that kind of thing. There's no fumes that can kill you and so forth, and you can't catch on fire and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think what you're saying there about the different fundamental change in the mindset is really interesting. from how the utility runs today and versus how it may run in the future, how it will need to run in the future for all these distributed. We think of this, the way we're thinking about this is, I think, similar. In the past, it's kind of a network of nodes, and it's an engineering problem where you can schedule things out, like you said, and it takes a lot of expertise and an engineering problem that essentially is a complicated problem where this change to it where each node is working in its own self-interest makes it more of an ecosystem, and there's a lot more unpredictability, like you said, and there's so it's like changes the model from an engineering problem to maybe ecosystem, or thinking of it as an organism, or thinking about it as a market maybe. So you start looking at Uber or something like that, where how can you have these different self-interested nodes all working together towards a common end, and it's going to be very different, and it is going to require a different way of thinking about how this all should work.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And then there's the policy and the regulatory factor that come into play. And there's a lot of I'll call it well-intended legislation that has unintended consequences coming with it. And Michael mentioned net metering, which is a good example. That's been phenomenal at jumpstarting a market and creating a demand for rooftop solar in places like California. It has also ironically worked against the adoption of local storage, because it's more affordable for me as a customer to spin my meter backwards and let the grid be my battery than it is for me to bring in a battery and buy a battery for my house in those places. So, and you see that dynamic happening in kind of all parts of the value chain. So hard to say where it's going to go. I think we're going to see a lot of all of the above. We'll see some utilities adapt to this new world pretty readily. We'll see others kind of kicking and screaming and moving pretty slowly and struggling to stay alive. And then I think over time, we're going to find a kind of a fundamental shift towards basic economics. And the economics are in favor of renewables. 10 years ago, it was nobody thought renewables could succeed without subsidies. Now it's like the no-brainer power. It's a question of what do you do to deal with the intermittency and the variability that introduces.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Yeah, I think that those market mechanisms or policies, like you said, are going to be really could shape things, and sometimes in unintended ways. I brought up the Uber example. Like right now, there's no mechanism for you as a homeowner, if you've got extra power or if it's in your battery, to share that with your neighbor. And so something that allows that, or like think about how would be the way to enable that, besides just having a large monolithic utility that kind of waves the magic wand away, could really change the way things happen.
Yeah, exactly. And then you got to, we got to think about, okay, who's most likely to be able to respond quickly and come up with that future? Is it the large incumbents, or is it the newer entrants?
That's right. So with these new entrants, there's a lot of investor sentiment that goes along with it. How have you seen high profile policy changes impact investor sentiment?
Yeah, it's interesting. I came from high tech for nearly 20 years before getting into renewables. And one of the things that shocked me in that transition was high tech works on a pretty economic basis. Renewables and energy are hugely policy driven. So I went from this, non-policy world to an extreme policy world, and got accustomed to every exec meeting. We'd look around the table and talk about which unique policies in which markets were most favorable, so therefore where we should be putting our product or planning to put our product in the coming quarters. And then I think it was like 2010, Total made a majority investment in SunPower, which was my company at the time. I remember sitting down with one of the board members and asking him, well, what market did he think would be the best for us going forward? And at this point, I was used to this dance of, you figure out kind of think about where policy is going to pull you. And he said, Jorg, it's really simple. You look at solar resource, overlay it with demand, with population, and that's where you go. And relatively high electric rates, that's where you go. So the fundamentals win in the long run. And I and that's basically what's happened with solar and what is happening with renewables in general, and what ends up winning in the long run. And investors, ultimately they like that more than the policy stuff. Policy is either a great upside to have, or drives uncertainty and can be a nuisance and a challenge. And uncertainty is, frankly, it's a problem for investors. So it's this nasty two-edged sword. We look at it as, okay, our business plan is based on how do we win irrespective of policy. Let's win based on the fundamentals. Policy will and should help us. Right now, we're looking at what appears to be massive tailwinds. If the Biden administration does half of what they're talking about, that's going to be great, I think, for the country, the planet, and for companies like ours and Michael's.
That's fantastic. So I'm really interested in that, like you said, lithium-ion, you had been convinced it was the end all be all, and then now you're at a nickel hydrogen company. What ways do you see that potential market as big enough for multiple storage options versus maybe a winner takes all mindset?
Yeah, the battery storage market is monstrous. The analyst charts on this, they're candidly too big to even get my head around. A teeny tiny fraction of what they're predicting in terms of overall global growth for energy storage would blow away our business plan. So it's monstrous. There is room for many different technologies. And then what we're also seeing, I think, is the analysts every year, they raise their estimates, and I think they're still low. I think they've underestimated the power of storage at all durations. There's a lot of, we're seeing lithium ions capability stretch in terms of duration, life cycle, and capability. We're seeing companies like ours fill a gap there. And then there's mechanical storage, think the equivalent of pumped hydro, which is kind of the gold standard for large grid scale energy storage, that'll come online and have a place and have a piece of that puzzle for decades to come. I think that the real question is, it's about cost, fundamentally cost, and then unique capability. And the companies that can have a compelling cost, and that's a combination of the upfront CapEx and the operating expense. Operating expense is a shockingly high percentage of the levelized cost of energy. It's typically about a third. So think 1/3 CapEx. The utilities buying power, it's say 6 cents a kilowatt hour on average. Think 2 cents for upfront CapEx, 2 cents for OpEx, 2 cents for cost of capital, debt, and equity as part of that equation. So, to compete storage, a new entrant in storage like us, we've got to be able to have a low cost, have a really compelling OpEx component, and then have capabilities that are unique. So we know our chemistry inherently, it's just happy in this broad temperature range. We don't need air conditioning. We don't have fire suppression. We don't need heaters, in the cold months, et cetera. It hums along at kind of at the same performance characteristics, regardless of how hot or cold it might be. There are use cases where that's extremely valuable. So it's those that have differentiation and can meet the ever declining cost curves are going to win.
Yeah, that's fantastic. All right, we're going to move into audience Q&A. We're getting a couple of questions coming in, which is exciting. So first we'll go from Lynn Schneider. So she said, okay, homes and cars, okay, but you still need gas, diesel to power huge farm equipment or food production that costs $200K a piece or more. And so what do we see as replacements for those super large kind of manufacturing use cases?
Yeah, well, I can jump in there. I mean, I think this is an example of where, as we're watching the capabilities of batteries expand massively. And look at what's happened with electric vehicles. 3 years ago, the typical range was about 60 miles. If you look at a Nissan Leaf, it's now 5 times that. Tesla's been there for quite some time. We'll see ranges of well in excess of 500 miles, but very, very quickly here. That set of capabilities of the energy density you can put in a moving thing and the ability to charge it quickly and get power to that charging site are going to improve by orders of magnitudes in the coming decade. And in parallel with that, we have competing technologies like moving to hydrogen and green hydrogen, generating hydrogen with, with renewable energy, that they're pretty far behind on the cost curve, but they could jump into that as well. So there's a lot of opportunity to conquer what appears to be impossible today. A decade ago, no one thought it was possible that solar could be cost competitive with fossil fuels. I'd say up until 2012, Wall Street thought that was just absolutely not going to work. And it was right around then that the opinion started to change as they saw the cost curves coming down.
Yeah, that's great. And that ties into kind of that technology space of the market forces we talked to. Like there's technologies that are going to unlock some of these things. And it's really to look for is like with hydrogen or with, solid state batteries or, economic nuclear fusion or something like that would really unlock those floodgates for some of these use cases that right now are a little bit out of reach. And we expect as attention keeps being focused here that, and there's money to be made and there's incentives to move away from hydrocarbons that, the free market will find solutions for those things.
And it'll be a combination of solutions, right? There's not just one solution that's going to take everything. It really is about this stack of opportunities that are going to have different applications. And some applications are going to work better off of maybe hydrogen. Some are going to work better off of electric. And there are other solutions that we, don't have commercialized yet that we would expect to take another part of the stack.
Yeah, no, that's really good. We've been talking with a company based in Northern Canada, then they work for, a couple months at a time. And of course, if the time when they're working on a project is in the middle of the winter, a solar solution is not going to be super effective for them, but there's other things, right, that you can go to. So that's great. We had a question, I think for you, Jorg. So how much longer does nickel hydrogen last than a lithium ion in terms of charges?
So the longest lithium ion batteries today are in roughly 3,000 to 4,000 charge discharge cycle range. Now we think that's going to expand. There's a lot that are trying to reach at least double that. So I think 10,000. Our technology begins at 30,000. So 3-day, 30 years. And the longest running batteries using nickel hydrogen are actually in the hundreds of thousands of charge discharge cycles. So the reason for that is our battery, it's basically half of a fuel cell. As you charge it, it builds up hydrogen in a pressure vessel, not at a very high pressure, but it builds it up. And then as you discharge it, that hydrogen gets reabsorbed into water. And the nature of that chemical reaction is extraordinarily durable and robust. So you can abuse the hell out of this battery. You can overcharge it, which will fry any conventional battery, and you can drain it all the way to zero. Picture, draining your car battery to zero a couple of times and you end up replacing the battery. Well, with nickel hydrogen, it just recovers and you're fine. So that's why these things last forever.
That's really interesting. So the lithium dendrites and things aren't a problem for you.
Exactly. Yeah. We don't have a dendrite equivalent challenge.
That's impressive. So maybe an interesting one for you, Michael. So the current administration, we've been talking about the Biden administration, how they're on track to increase financial incentives. And you mentioned this to Jorg. Well, there's also some things such as the solar import tariffs from China seem like they're on track to keep it in place. Do you have any thoughts on like opposing public policy and how those interact with each other?
I think that what helps the industry at large is just having a better view to the future, right? So whatever that is, if that's a tariff or that's an incentive, the idea that there's some stability in that expectation allows you to plan for it. And so I think that's what we're all looking for, is a better understanding of what does the future landscape look like for us so that we can plan for it. The truth is that costs have continued to come down. And so even though there have been tariffs, the costs have come down in a way that's allowed those components to still be extremely competitively priced. And we expect that the technology is going to continue to improve, and we're going to continue to see future cost efficiencies. And the density of a solar panel is double what it was 5 years ago. So you're seeing these material improvements. I think more so the question is really on the incentives. Where does the administration go with these incentives? Do we get an extension of the ITC as we expect? Does that come out at a higher value? Is there a direct pay option? I think we want to understand the fundamentals of what that looks like, because that could be another shot in the arm for the industry. And I think a lot of us, that we don't have to have those incentives. The industry is doing well. Those incentives definitely improve the consumer's take rate, and it helps to move the solution in the market faster. So I think keeping an eye out for that and what happens this year is going to be important to the administration.
No, fantastic. I will switch to a kind of a different angle. So recently there was that Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack, and there's been a general rise in cybercrime. A lot with distributed energy is going to come distributed systems and Internet of Things. How have you seen these sort of rises in cybercrime impacting the pace of the energy transition?
Yeah, I think the Colonial Pipeline is an interesting example. Same with the weather event that we had in Texas a couple months ago. It's actually amazing to me that we have not had more massive grid outages like that. If you think about what it takes to keep our electric power grid in balance, it doesn't take a whole lot to throw it off balance, and you have transformers blowing up and things. So that industry does a great job of keeping it together. The external threats, whether it's cybercrime or weather events, et cetera, are looming all the time. What I think is going to happen is that is driving, and I think we'll see it on the residential side first, a desire, perhaps an irrational desire, to have my independence, have my own resilience, have my own battery backup. I've got friends asking me all the time, and neighbors, how can I get a battery backup for my home? I ask them, well, what are you solving for? Oh, well, it's in case there's a power shut off. Well, we've had exactly one in my neighborhood in the last year. But I'm seeing neighbors up and down the street paying tens of thousands of dollars to get battery backup. That's an emotional reaction, which candidly I think is healthy for the industry, because it's the more we do that, the more resilient we become, and the more we'll be able to withstand those types of outages and not suffer as much when they do hit us, because they will.
Yeah, I would just add that. I just think it's another thing for consumers to think about. I think Jorg just nailed it. With people don't have confidence in what's available to them today, and they're looking for that security. They're looking for that peace of mind. And I think that some of these more resilient solutions that you can control yourself versus a black box of how it's being controlled gives consumers the ability to understand where it's coming from and to feel a little bit more secure in how they consume it.
And I think that's really interesting, that because we are, as consumers, used to thinking of energy as a commodity, and it's just a black box, a little outlet you plug in the wall and stuff comes on, right? Whereas a lot of this distributed energy is changing that, so it's not just a generic commodity to something more tangible that you're seeing happen on your roof or nearby, or in your battery panel or your wind farm or anything like that.
Yeah, we do take it for granted, and I think resiliency has been taken for granted for so long, and now it's not as common. Resiliency is not what it used to be, and it's going to be less so as there's more stress put on the grid. You can't keep up with the current demand in an economically feasible way without significantly increasing local fees to consumers. And you can't gold plate our network. It's just it's too big, it's too broad, it's too old. At the end of the day, we're dependent on a wire that hangs on a dead tree. So it's not the way that you want to really think about new technology, right? That if the wind can take that down, or a car can knock down the post, or heck, the termite will take these guys out, right? I think it's not the most resilient infrastructure for the future of this country.
Yeah. Yeah, if I could add to that, I think we're seeing, the Colonial Pipeline is a good example of, a challenge on resiliency. We're piling on challenge right now. All of the, how do you combat climate change models, they begin with electrify everything. So imagine that amount of electric load adding to our existing grid. Okay, we're adding the variability and the way we're adding it. So it's more power we need, and it's distributed, and it's variable, and it's congested. That That's got to be hard. That means
Yeah.
that these isolated events are going to become dominant unless we find a way to insulate ourselves from them and protect ourselves.
I think that's really interesting because a lot of the gains we've made over the past 3, 4, 5 years is due to improvements in energy efficiency, and that we can do the same amount with less energy. But if we're electrifying anything, that's going to reverse that trend somewhat.
Right.
Cool. All right. Next question. For regulation, what would be the most effective regulation to develop renewables in a cost-effective way? So if you had your pick of whatever public policy or regulation that you would make, how would you go about it?
Oh, I'd love to hear Michael's answer on this.
So look, we really like the direction that the administration's leaning on extending the renewable tax credit. So the investment tax credit, I think, is something that benefits large companies and individuals equally. I think having that at a fair price. At the end of the day, I think what I personally like is a fair playing field. Like, we can't continue to subsidize oil and gas and not provide a balanced playing field for renewables. If we want a balanced playing field, we need to balance the incentives and the structures that support them. And we need to make sure that we're in a position for the solutions that we want to survive over time and to mature over time. Like, we should be making those investments. I think there's a lot of great ideation that's out there. I think what we're seeing across the landscape right now is a tremendous amount of capital flowing into renewables. And I think that's going to help drive a lot of these technologies that we're all looking for, right? We want smarter houses. We want more efficient homes. We want smarter cars. We want more efficient cars. We want to make sure that the technologies that we need to depend on over time are available to us. And I think we need to take away anything that disincentivizes those technologies being successful, when we know that that's where we want to go as a society, and we want a level playing field. And ideally, we also want the incentives on the other side to drive them.
What would your view be on, or you want to go, Jorg, and then
I was going to say I agree with that. Although if I step back from it and thought, okay, what would be the most effective at driving change the quickest? I think it would be a very broad carbon tax. That also happens to be the least pragmatic in terms of getting that across the finish line with governments around the world. But basically disincentivize the carbon generation across the value chain.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going to go. I wanted to jump on the carbon tax or the carbon price, maybe paired with some sort of carbon dividend to make it more pragmatic or palatable for people.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Next question. I had one. Okay, so next question was about so yeah, the breakthroughs in upcoming storage. What do you see as happening as we're looking forward, over the next 5 years, or what's on your radar that we might not know about?
Well, I think one of the interesting things we've found in the battery world is it moves a lot slower than I think we all expect it to. I think we'll continue to see the range in electric vehicles expand. So that both through energy density and then how those get packaged and put into mobile forms of transport, we're going to eliminate range anxiety. So for a lot of folks buying EVs today, that's already gone. That's only going to get better. So the notion of how am I going to get, on my, from San Francisco to Los Angeles and safely up to Lake Tahoe for my vacation or whatever, that will cease to be a problem very, very quickly based on known technology and then the breakthroughs that are kind of right around the corner. I think from a longer duration standpoint, we see a lot of hype around long duration storage. Oh, who's going to give us seasonal batteries and so forth? Really, that, in my view, really comes down to a question of cost. So theoretically, yeah, you could take lithium-ion batteries and stack them together and turn it into seasonal storage. Problem is, it's cost prohibitive. And there are a number of players who have, I'll call it, very compelling, largely mechanical oriented storage plays that will emerge there. And then you'll see technologies like ours where the cost point will drop well below where lithium ion can go based on the cost of that bill of materials for raw materials. And then you can use us, for as long a duration as you want to, because that cost will continue to drop.
And I'll maybe answer that also, just not from the technology standpoint, but from the capability standpoint. So I think a few things that are trending positively are, one, the technology that's being put together to service the home. And I think in some cases, the commercial enterprise has more capabilities to it. So you've got integrated load control technologies that are becoming more and more a part of that solution, providing more insights on exactly how the battery is performing, what capabilities the battery is providing, and providing for a more robust experience. And then I think second, we're going to be adding these second batteries to our home. So you got the first battery that's stationary, you're going to have the second battery that's mobile. And the relationship between those two batteries, how those batteries are utilized, and where those batteries go in the network is going to be important, right? And so I think, you're already seeing batteries showing up in lots of different places. Batteries are showing up inside of, charging stations in different locations. You got batteries are obviously showing up in cars, they're showing up on walls. But I think we're going to see a proliferation of batteries in different applications, and how those batteries are networked, how they communicate, when and how they charge and discharge. Like there's more of an organic network. I think that's evolving. That's going to be interesting to watch and also to drive and be able to tap into for different applications.
Yeah, it made me think of the new Ford F-150 that was just unveiled, and it can be your whole home battery for like several days, depending on the size of your house and things. That's pretty wild. But also, you wouldn't want to come out as a consumer and find out your trucks doesn't have any battery because it's been charging all night.
But any EV can be a whole home battery for multiple days. I mean, there's nothing unique about that technology necessarily. It's your average EV. Jorg was talking about the range extension on today's EVs versus yesterday's, and a lot of that has to do with it's a much larger battery on average that's in those vehicles, and that average battery that's in a vehicle is 4 to 5 times, all the way up to 7 times the average size of the battery that most people install in their home. So the truth is, you can take an EV, and again, with the right technology and the right policy, allow that to be an energy source for the home. And you don't have to, you can set software controls on it so you don't drain the battery. It doesn't, I think there's this fear, I always hear that fear of, oh, they're going to drain the battery in the car and I won't be able to drive away. Well, no, you just set a minimum for how much the home can use, and then stop consuming the battery and make sure that there's enough there to get whatever mileage you need out of the vehicle. So this is, again, another contemplation of the future. And it's something that's, again, going to be an important part of how we think about transportation in the future, energy infrastructure in the future, resiliency in the home. All those are converging, behind EVs plus solar plus battery storage, and the network effect that's going to create on the mobility of electrons, right? How electrons are going to move in the future. Are they going to move from the home to the office, from the office to the home, some combination in between? The infrastructure for EVs is going to be a part of that decision, but so is the technology, and so are the suppliers.
That's really interesting. Here's a good question. Someone asked, kind of looking way into the future, do you think we'll always have a need for grid scale generation, or could we serve all our needs through distributed?
I think that, sorry, Jorg, I was going to just start with, I think the best real estate to use for energy generation today is the stuff that's not being used for anything else. So I say, use the rooftops of all the commercial enterprises, residential enterprises, parking garages, you name it. Even floating opportunities where they make sense in some water reservoirs and other places. Use those first, and let's get more solar panels up there on super cheap, unutilized real estate. But beyond that, I do think that commercial is going to be required. I think that we need grid scale, utility scale rather, solar to complement the grid, and I think that's going to, for the foreseeable future, be an important part of the energy stack.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I think it's all of the above. And the most efficient economies of scale by far are at the grid level. The simple math of, to power the entire United States, you need basically 100 miles by 100 miles square. Solar panels, that will do it. That will power the whole US. But it's obviously impractical. You'd need to, redo the entire transmission network. Plus you have battery storage to, at a massive scale. So you got that balance between economies of scale and then resiliency and practicality and just using simple available space on my rooftop at home, et cetera, for solar. And then there's other forms. So it'll be in all of the above, and who wins in a specific market is going to depend on the nuances and the weather patterns and and so forth in that market.
And the distribution network, I'd add to that, how effectively it's built, managed, and supportive based on where load growth is, and load growth is growing.
Yeah, great. One last question. Let's do, okay, so Tesla solar roof, this is maybe a fun one to poke fun at, recently went through massive price increase. Any thoughts about that, or why that happened, or what market forces drove that sort of thing?
Without any inside info, I can shed a little light on what it's like to make a roof tile product, because a number of companies, including my past company, did that decades ago. It's technically more challenging to make a roof tile. It's a more complicated connection, and anything that goes against where you're doing something that's a bit of a niche product is going to be inherently more expensive. So that's certainly something going against them. There has been supply chain blips that have occurred here over the last several months and quarters related to COVID and other things, and then the short-term supply-demand imbalance. I would not sweat that looking ahead. I think we've seen that time after time. The growing economies of scale will conquer the short-term blips. Those that have been around the industry for a while may recall the days about a decade ago when polysilicon was at $400 a kilogram. And now it's back in the 20s, where it's kind of at its historical levels. We'll see short-term spikes and they'll overcome it. I think Tesla's got a nice high-end product that does have smaller volumes and does have economies of scale challenges they'll need to overcome, as well as some technical issues that are more complicated than putting conventional solar panels on a rooftop.
Yeah. Michael, anything from you?
Yeah, I think Jorg talked about a couple of different dimensions. I do think that what's happening in the global supply scale, supply side is definitely impacting a lot of different manufacturers. I think we're hearing that pretty consistently across all industries and verticals. Tesla's got a great product, and maybe they're just doing a pricing experiment to see what the market can bear, though. Also, I know a number of people that have gotten their solution, extremely happy with it. So it could also just be demand curtailment.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think we're almost at time. I just wanted to show, just wrap things up. Thank you so much, Michael and Jorg. Really fun talking to you about this. Great insights. And just a reminder that anyone who wants to, we have a free consultation with our energy team, new energy team. Reach out to me or Stephen Duffy, either through this email or via LinkedIn, and we'd be happy to talk to you. So, yeah, been great. Thank you so much.
Terrific. Thank you, Derek.
Thank you. Bye now.
See ya.